You're probably like me, someone who grew up with a game that piqued their interest when they were younger, and as you've grown older, you continue to follow that game as it grows into something beyond its original boundaries, inevitably evolving into something unrecognizable at times, for both good and bad reasons. And that's what The Legend of Zelda has always been for me. Last time I talked about Zelda, I shared the beginning of my story as a Zelda fan, being exposed to A Link to the Past, how it built upon the gameplay and story of the prior entries and inevitably became the foundation of the whole franchise, and overall, tell you just how the game made me love Zelda as a whole. However, A Link to the Past was only the first half of that story. I grew up with my dad's Super Nintendo and Nintendo 64, so naturally, I also grew up with Ocarina of Time. Just to make sure we're all on the same page and nobody's lost, let me give you a quick recap on The Legend of Zelda and all the games up to the release of Ocarina of Time. The Legend of Zelda, released in 1986, introduces the hero Link on his quest given to him by Zelda's nursemaid, Impa, to defeat the evil Ganon and save the princess. Ganondorf stole something called the Triforce of Power, a magical triangle that gives him power, and in order to defeat him, Link must collect pieces of the Triforce of Wisdom, and it's basically a light switch. Aside from its simple story, the game also introduces dungeons with puzzles that need to be solved in order to progress, as well as series staple items like the boomerang, bombs, bows, and other items that you'll see across the many games and spin-offs. The Adventure of Link, released in 1987, is a direct sequel to Zelda 1, taking place a few years after Link defeated Ganon. Now a young adult, he sees a mark of 3 triangles on the back of his hand, and Impa sends Link again on another quest, but this time to find the hidden third piece of the Triforce of Courage. She also tells Link about a legend about another Princess Zelda, one from centuries or over a millennium in the past, that she's been hidden away by the royal family after being cursed to sleep eternally by her younger brother and an evil wizard. The only way to wake her up is if Link gets the Triforce of Courage, but first he has to avoid all of Ganon's minions who are trying to resurrect him by killing him. This game is the black sheep of the franchise, and sure, it expands on the story and the lore of the original, but rather than being a top-down view, the game's combat takes place in these side-view platformer sections. This game also is the first one to include magic, specifically with the precursor to the magic meter, the magic bar. Yes, I know people argued with me on that, yes I am petty. Overall, aside from the reoccurring characters and the fact that the game takes place in the same world, this game, at the time, was only really Zelda in name only. A Link to the Past, released in 1991, was intentionally made as a prequel to the original two. It serves to tell a story of a Link from the past and his conflict with Ganon and having to rescue Zelda along with 7 maidens. These maidens are descendants of sages who sealed Ganon away before the events of this game when he first took his monstrous form. You see, before the events of the game, we learn about a man named Ganondorf Dragmire, or at least one of the manuals calls him Ganondorf Dragmire, we just call him Ganondorf. Before the Triforce was in the hands of the royal family, all 3 pieces were unified and hidden away in a place called the Sacred Realm. When all 3 pieces are unified, they can grant any wish, and Ganondorf, being a thief with the knowledge on how to access the Sacred Realm, sought after it. But because of the imbalance in his heart, the Triforce split into 3 pieces, and he took the form of a blue pig demon-looking thing, as well as transforming the Sacred Realm into the Dark World, a twisted reflection of his heart. A Link to the Past basically went back and did what the first game did and increased the scale of it. 2 worlds with a bigger map, different environments, new and reoccurring items, more lore and story to flesh out the world a little bit more, all just accumulating into something that made it feel pretty much like it was the real foundation of the overall series, making Zelda 1 look more like a rough draft. And Link's Awakening, released in 1993. Link gets shipwrecked on an island he can't escape from. The only way to get out is he has to wake up a giant fish sleeping inside of an egg at the top of a mountain. Yes, it is weird, but this whole island is a manifestation of that fish's dream. This is the first Zelda game to really have a proper, connection between characters, specifically with Link and Marin. And the game was created with the intention of originally being a Link to the Past port for the Game Boy, but it eventually spiraled into its own unique story that doesn't really have an impact on the overall story of the series, aside from just telling you where the Link from A Link to the Past went after the events of Link to the Past. But at the time, this was probably one of the more unsettling and emotional entries, just because of how it's hard to describe. It's disturbing, yet sad, yet melancholic. I think melancholic, sorry. I don't know. Why does my microphone keep randomly getting muffled? That is so weird. But anyways, at this point, you could probably see the pattern going on. We have prequel, sequel, prequel, sequel. I don't know if it's a coincidence or not, but regardless, the 5th entry already had the path laid out for it. Specifically regarding the Sacred Realm and the hidden place of the Triforce and Ganondorf's origin, the original pre-pig form of Ganon. But even beyond the lore and timeline placement and all that other stuff, I love this entry because it's the first one to truly breathe life into the franchise through its characters, story, and world now just being all at the forefront. I mean, just look at the title screen where you can see the moon descending as the sun rises while watching Link ride on horseback. And as the camera follows Link, the title melody starts to play as we see the main overworld come into view with Death Mountain and the gates of Hyrule Castle Town in the distance and a bit of Lon Lon Ranch, Zora's River, and then ending with the camera going into this massive log entrance into the vast, deep forest of Hyrule where our journey truly begins. The game starts off with a narrator, the Great Deku Tree, introducing the children of the forest who he protects, the Kokiri. Each of the Kokiri have their own guardian fairy, however, one of the children of the forest doesn't have one. This incarnation of Link, who is, at this very moment, having a nightmare where he sees a woman and a little girl with expressions of urgency and fear riding off into the unknown, and before he can have time to react, he is attacked by a man clad in black armor. We cut away from the dream and see the Great Deku Tree call for a fairy by the name of Navi, and tell her that it's finally time for Link to have his own fairy, saying that with evil on the rise and being so strong that it's overwhelming him, it seems it's time for Link to come face to face with his destiny. At this moment, it's pretty vague, but the Great Deku Tree seems to know more about Link this time around than the player does, unlike the other games where Link was just some kid who was at the right place at the right time to become the hero of Hyrule. This also may allude to people in this era of Hyrule being aware of some sort of prophecy, however, I'm getting ahead of myself again. Either way, the Great Deku Tree sends Navi to go find Link, and I just remembered how blown away I was at this cutscene when I was a kid. We take this really dynamic perspective of Navi flying through Kokiri Forest in order to find Link. It's impressive because it not only shows the village and tries to make it feel more alive, but it also shows off the visuals, since this time around it was the first 3D Zelda. And since Kokiri Forest serves as the game's tutorial area, it helps to map it out in the mind of the player. After a rude awakening by Navi and being told that you were summoned by the Great Deku Tree, you are now given complete control of Link. And really quickly, again, I really just want to say I love the details of Link's house. The bed, the table, the mirror, the sink, even though it's just a little thing, since Link is a silent protagonist, it really goes to show his personality a little bit. Not so much in a direct way, but a subtle one. Once you step outside, Link is greeted by Saria, his only friend since all the Kokiri children treated Link as an outcast for not having a fairy. Zelda's creator Shigeru Miyamoto really liked Disney growing up, and it's a well-known fact that Link's design is based off Peter Pan. Taking more inspiration from Peter Pan, the Kokiri never age, and they are said to die if they ever leave the forest, but that can be interpreted as death due to aging. I remember the first time I saw this as a kid, it really helped me connect with the starting area a little bit more, since I was a child, playing as a child in a forest full of children, but it was always so fascinating to see how they lived, especially since they lived in these massive logs, and inside is just like a home carved out, everything like wooden furniture and all that stuff. It's just it's so cozy. It should go without saying that Kokiri Forest being the starting area also means that it is the tutorial area too. It gives you the opportunity to explore a bit, although if it's your first time playing Ocarina of Time, you'll notice that exploration is mandatory here, as Mido, the leader of the Kokiri, blocks the path to the Great Deku Tree, first taunting Link for not being a real man because he doesn't have a fairy, and then going on to say that even though now he does have a fairy, he still won't grant him entry unless he has the Kokiri sword and shield. And while you're looking for the items, there's a bunch of NPCs you can talk to, the majority of which pretty much serve as just for the tutorial section. The girl above the shop teaches Link about Z-targeting distant objects and people, a mechanic introduced in this 3D Zelda game that carries over to all the other ones. And Z-targeting is a new mechanic that pretty much helps you not just target on people and objects, but also enemies so that you don't get lost in the fight, especially if you're surrounded by a bunch of them in a room. It helps you focus on one at a time. There are these two kids that Mido forced to do lawn work, and they teach Link that he can pick up objects like rocks. Meanwhile, some objects like grass require strength upgrades in order to pick them up. Ironically, this feels like a foreshadowing moment for 2 moments later in the game, similar to how Twilight Princess's goat stopping minigame at the tutorial of that game foreshadows both the Death Mountain climb as well as a big part of the final boss fight. There's the home of the Know-It-All Brothers, where Link can learn about all of the buttons and the menus, and finally there's this little Kokiri fighter and a bunch of signs around him, both telling Link how to fight, and right besides them is a little hole Link can crawl through to get the Kokiri sword. If you want to get the Deku Shield, it's in the store. You're just gonna need to save up 40 rupees either within the confines of Kokiri Forest, or inside the nearby Lost Woods. What did I say? After you've collected everything you need, Link and Navi head over to the Great Deku Tree. It's a massive tree with a kind of elderly face attached to it, and from the get-go, he's aware that Link's been plagued with nightmares for a while now, saying that these nightmares are a byproduct of an evil on the rise. And as a test of courage, the Great Deku Tree tells Link that he needs to use his wisdom and courage to lift the curse placed on him. And of course, Link says yes. And this test of courage basically involves Link entering inside of the Great Deku Tree, which is infested with these spider monsters, a couple of Deku Babas, which are these Venus flytrap type monsters, as well as these strange creatures called the Goma larva. Aside from these enemies, this is obviously the first dungeon in the game, and it's incredibly easy since technically it's still part of the tutorial. Instead of being there to teach you the new controls like the forest did, it's a tutorial to teach you about the classic Zelda stuff, or at least freshen it up in your mind. Sometimes you gotta light stuff up to open doors, other times you gotta shoot these eyeballs to open doors, and then there are these other times where you have to press down on switches to open doors or the pathway forward, except now you're just being retaught that stuff in a 3D space. I think one of my favorite new mechanics is the use of the shield. This time it's linked to the R button, and it's ready whenever you need it. And sure, Link has always had a shield in the first 3 games, but you've never really needed to control it since it's just there, except in Link's Awakening. Link needs to use his shield here so he can fight off these bush creatures called Deku Sprouts, because they hide whenever you get too close, so you have to deflect the nuts they shoot out of their mouths back at them. Deku Scrubs are native to the forests of Hyrule, and there are even taller ones called Business Sprouts that sell you stuff. They can't really help the fact that they just spit nuts whenever they try to speak. However, the Deku Scrubs inside of the Great Deku Tree are serving whatever creature is hurting it on the inside right now. Making our way downward into the deepest chamber of the tree, the door shuts behind us and we're left in the dark, only hearing this scratching noise and dust falling from above us. Taking the camera to first-person view reveals this one-eyed creature crawling on the ceiling. Once you both make eye contact, she drops from above, revealing the boss's title card, Goma, the parasitic armored arachnid. You pretty much just have to use every single item you've acquired up to this point, like the Deku Nuts to stun her when she's on the ground, the slingshot if she tries to run away on the ceiling, and then you have to also slash her division sign looking eye with your sword. But unfortunately, defeating Goma wasn't enough, as Navi and Link are too late. The curse already overpowered the Great Deku Tree. This was just a test of courage. Even if they were a second earlier, they wouldn't have been able to save him. But before his demise, the Great Deku Tree tells Link that the person who cursed him was the wicked man of the desert, who had been ceaselessly searching for the location of the Sacred Realm in order to find the Triforce, the all-powerful wish-granting triangles. He then proceeds to tell Link the story of the creation of the world. Din created the land, Nehru created the laws, and Farore created life. And when they eventually departed, they left behind the Triforce. Something that important can't get into the wicked man's hands. So the Great Deku Tree sends Link off on a quest to meet the Princess of Destiny and draws his final breath, leaving the future in Link's hands. The Kokiri are confused and scared. Mido and Fado in particular blame Link for the death of the Great Deku Tree. Link was already seen as an outcast, and this was just the icing on the cake. All that's left for Link now is to just leave the forest. The connection between Kokiri Forest that leads to the outside world is held together by a rope bridge. It's dangling above a little pocket of the Lost Woods. At the bridge is Saria, waiting to say goodbye to her best friend, and handing him the fairy ocarina. When you play my ocarina, I hope you will think of me and come back to the forest to visit. Link may be a silent protagonist, but this hesitant slow walk turning into this sprint always screamed such an overbearing sadness to me. I can't really put into words, but With that, this chapter of the game comes to a melancholy close. But we don't have time to be sad, as we are greeted by the loud and adventurous theme of Hyrule Field, and I like the fact that the castle is shown first, and the introduction camera kind of acts as a guide towards our destination, and then ending at where we're starting. There's also this strange owl who seems to know Link is starting his journey, and we'll see him from time to time kind of following Link around, and for the most part all he does is really drop hints and words of encouragement. But going back to Hyrule Field itself, it is just so massive, and it should be, since it's the center point connecting all of Hyrule. To the east is Kokiri Forest, that's where we're starting, and then more north of that is Zoras River, home of the Zoras. More northward is Kakariko Village, and to the south is Lake Hylia, and all the way to the far west is Gerudo Valley. But at the northmost point lies Hyrule Castletown. There's not really much to do in the field itself at this point, but that doesn't really matter since you're going to be revisiting Hyrule Field multiple times, and on each visit you'll likely progress more in the game. With every weapon and upgrade you'll unlock, you'll just be able to uncover more secrets like hidden grottos, items, and just more things overall. But none of that is really mandatory. Most of the stuff in Hyrule Field is just optional. One point of interest you could visit right now is Lon Lon Ranch. It's right around the center point of Hyrule Field, but there's not much to do there either right now since, again, it is still way too early, but we will be back there later. For now, without any delay, let's just continue onwards towards the castle. Hyrule Castletown is the most densely populated area in the whole game, just a bustling town with people enjoying their time together at the market. Stalls filled with people trying to buy stuff, shops to buy equipment, or even some mini-games that are locked right now, but you'll get them later. And there's just many interesting characters here that you can meet that give you some interesting information. I remember really liking this guy up here because he'd talk about Hylians having big ears to hear the voices of gods, which as a kid gave me one of those aha moments because I realized he was referring to some lore that was added in A Link to the Past. I believe it was in a manual or a guide. I don't know if the actual game itself referred to it. There's a woman who talks about the nearby Temple of Time and somehow knows the legend of how it's linked to the Sacred Realm. There's also this one old lady who talks about going to Lake Hylia since a lot of interesting things float down the river, and I know she's referring to something that's important later in the game, but it just gave me a laugh because it kind of makes it sound like she's making things float down there. I don't know. The last time I read it, it just sounded like someone trying to hide the evidence of a body or whatever, but then maybe that's just me. An old man mentions a Sheikah woman living in the castle. This is the first game in the franchise to include a Sheikah, so we don't really know what that means right now. There's also this one NPC you can sell stuff to if it's contained in a bottle, like milk or spider. There's also these two guys laughing and making fun of Link for wanting to go see the princess, but then in the process tell you about how they failed to sneak in, thus unintentionally telling you how to get in. Also, there is this one couple that I remember when I was a kid thinking it was so cute just seeing them dance all day and night, looking into each other's eyes and just spinning around dancing all day. When I first started replaying Ocarina of Time for this video, I showed this to my girlfriend. I showed her the 3DS version specifically, and I told her, you know, growing up, I wanted to have what they had. And she instantly said, "Oh, what, drugs?" and then proceeded to laugh at me. All I could do was silently judge her because she followed that up by saying she wanted to be the little girl in the market chasing around a chicken for all eternity. Actually, fun fact, I think that is the only Cucco in the whole game that Link cannot pick up. So yeah, you take that. Okay. All jokes aside, there is only one person that you really need to talk to in Castletown. This girl with red hair near the fountain. Her name is Malon, and she takes notice of Link's attire and recognizes him as a fairy boy from the forest. Her father owns Lon Lon Ranch, but she's been left to wait in Castletown alone because he just hasn't come back from delivering milk to the castle, so they kind of help each other out here. While Link is looking for a way into the castle, he'll try to find her father, and Malon, knowing that her father has a habit of falling asleep at any given moment, gives Link an egg that's close to hatching. Following the information given to him by the men in the castle, Link makes his way past the guards and finds this little hole on the side of the castle that he can crawl through. The only problem is that Malon's lazy-ass dad is in the way. So this game introduces a day and night cycle to the Zelda games. If you're in an outdoor area like Hyrule Field, for example, time flows. Meanwhile, if you're in an indoor area or a place considered a town like Kokiri Forest or the Castletown Market, the time will be set and frozen to whatever the time was when you entered that area after leaving a field area. In order to wake up Malon's father Talon, you need to wait until the sun rises in-game for the chicken to hatch from its egg, so you can use it to wake him up. A full day in Ocarina of Time is about 2 minutes and 30 seconds, so you won't really be waiting long. Pretty much by the time you actually reach him, the egg will most likely hatch. Also, quick side note, because I know it's mandatory to bring it up in every Ocarina of Time video, but Talon is obviously based off of Mario. Him and Malon both wear these Bowser brooches, and his ranch hand, who is... we'll meet him later. His name is Ingo, and is obviously based off Luigi. But one thing I find really interesting is that Mario's father in the Mario movie has the same facial hair as Talon, so classic Mario's voice actor voices a character based on a character who bases his appearance off of Mario. It comes full circle. After we wake him up and he runs faster than any of the Links ever have on the Pegasus boots, we make our way through the hole and into this little stealth section where Link can't get caught by the guards. And after you get past it, that's where we have our first ever encounter with Princess Zelda looking through a window in the castle courtyard. Actually, if you take a good look at her, you'll recognize her as the girl in Link's nightmare. Zelda reveals she's also been having nightmares, but hers start out with the skies of Hyrule being enveloped in dark clouds that eventually get parted by a bright light coming from the forest, and the light became a figure holding a spiritual stone given to him by the great Deku Tree. Seeing as how everything lines up too much to be a coincidence, she instantly trusts Link with knowledge on the location of the Triforce, the Sacred Realm. This is information passed down by the royal family in an attempt to hopefully help Link on his quest to prevent whatever these nightmares are warning the pair about. Zelda believes the dark clouds symbolize the man on the other side of the window. She had been spying on him the whole time. She calls him the man with evil eyes hailing from the desert far in the west, Ganondorf, the same man who strikes Link down in his dream. Sometimes I wish I was around back then during this era of Zelda, where this was the newest game, just to see the reaction of people, or my own reaction to seeing the human form of Ganon for the first time, a form that was only briefly mentioned in A Link to the Past's manual. But anyways, now Link has a clear objective, and to further guide Link, Impa, Zelda's nursemaid and bodyguard, directs Link to the spiritual stone to prevent Ganondorf from opening the door to the Triforce, specifically the next one at Death Mountain. She also teaches Link the royal family's sacred magical song. It's the same song used as the theme for Zelda and the Maidens in A Link to the Past, but in this game and moving forward throughout the franchise, this song is known as Zelda's Lullaby. Kakariko Village is a returning location from A Link to the Past, now sitting at the foot of Death Mountain. For me, it's one of the most comforting places in the whole game. On your first visit, you see a growing town filled with life. Originally, this place was home of the Sheikah, but Impa, being the last of her people, gave permission for the people of Hyrule to live here. And the new residents are hard at work constructing new buildings, and overall it's just a peaceful village. At the far end of the village is the entrance to the graveyard, with graves you can interact with to either make the spirits restless or find hidden treasure that was buried along with them. One of those treasures is the Sun's Song if you use Zelda's Lullaby to enter the royal family's tomb. It's not necessary for completing the game, it's kind of like a little bonus song you can play on the ocarina that can change the time and temporarily freeze Redeads and Gibdos, but we'll come back to the graveyard later. For now, Link's objective is to follow the trail up Death Mountain until he reaches Goron City. The Gorons are a race of rock-eating people who are tasked with guarding the Goron's ruby, but the leader, Darunia, had to hide it to prevent the other Gorons from trying to eat it. The type of rocks that Gorons like to eat the most are within Dodongo's cavern, but they had to seal up the entrance because of the influx of Dodongos inside. So everyone is starving, and if Link wants the Goron's ruby, he'll have to get rid of the Alpha Dodongo, the king, so the Gorons can go back to mining their meal peacefully. One thing I always liked about this dungeon is how you enter. It's like this big, grand room with rope bridges dangling above you, and the cave walls are being held together with the support of what I always assumed to be an even bigger Dodongo's ribcage and its giant skull greeting you from across the room. I used to think it was really cool that the bones looked all green and blue, kind of making you think like this isn't like a normal creature's skeleton, and the 3DS version of the game went to make it look more bone-like in color and texture. I don't really mind it, but it's just a difference. I also really like Dodongos. For one, because they're giant lizards, but also because they're one of the few Zelda enemies across the franchise where you can actually see like their growth, like their life cycle. Baby Dodongos leap at you and burrow away. Normal-sized Dodongos breathe fire and use their tails to swipe at you. And King Dodongos being enormous and able to roll up in balls. Anyways, after you beat the King Dodongo and you get the Goron's Ruby, you have a bit of a heartfelt moment where the Gorons accept you as their honorary brother and they all try to hug Link. I always thought it was funny how he always tried to run away since they're just like they're so strong. They're literally rock people that eat rocks. Of course Link was gonna run away. Actually, wait, I need to correct myself. Not honorary brother. It's more than that. It's more heartfelt. It's more of a closer connection. He wasn't told he's an honorary brother. Darunia himself, leader of the Gorons, tells Link, from now on, they are sworn brothers. I'm being dead serious when I say back when I was a toddler, and this was long before my sister was born, this section of the game made me want to be brothers with a Goron. After this moment with the Gorons, Link also receives the ability to use magic from the Great Fairy at the top of the mountain, and he continues his journey by going eastward to Zora's River, a dangerous, winding river that a child can't really traverse through alone, so our short hero has to use the help of this poor little Kuko, and let me tell you, this was another thing that influenced me as a toddler. I genuinely believe it is because of this part of the game that when I visited the Dominican Republic when I was around 8 years old, I used to grab my grandma's chickens to try to jump from a hill to the roof of her little outdoor kitchen hut, which eventually led to a chicken shitting all over me. Hidden behind a waterfall at the source of the river is the entrance to Zora's domain. It should be noted that this is the first game in the franchise where the Zoras are friendly. Back in the other games, Zoras were usually hostile. They would peek their heads out from the water and shoot fireballs at Link. And yes, there were a couple friendly ones, like the ones that would sell the flippers in A Link to the Past, or that one Zora that Link takes a picture with in Link's Awakening. But aside from those, the entirety of the Zora population would just be hostile. Except in this game, where they're all just friendly and they have a good relationship with Hyrule. At this point in time, they're in charge of Zora's Fountain, the main source of clean water across Hyrule. But before Link could even ask about the spiritual stones or even entering Zora's Fountain, Link has to save Princess Ruto, who for some reason got swallowed up by their patron deity. It doesn't take long to learn how to get swallowed up by the big fish, so you quickly find her to try to save her. She says that she usually explores his insides, but recently all these creatures started to make a home inside of him. Link promises to get her out while the two of them search for the Zora Sapphire since she had it in her possession before she got swallowed. And Link defeats the source of Jabu Jabu's bad tummy ache in the process. This massive jellyfish kind of brain looking thing. I never understood what it was meant to be. I just always assumed it was some sort of hive mind thing. I don't know, this boss, I've just never liked the way it's shaped because it doesn't like click with me what I'm like actually looking at. While the Great Deku Tree gives Link the emerald out of necessity, and Darunia gives Link the Goron Ruby as a gift for their newfound brotherly bond, Ruto gives Link the Zora Sapphire by forcing him into an engagement. Apparently she's fallen in love with Link because of his heroic acts in trying to save her and all the stuff that happened inside of Jabu Jabu's belly. And the poor awkward kid doesn't even know what to do. I always thought this was a really cute scene because for Link, this is the first time he's ever experienced something like this, and he shows it. But that's all we get from this exchange. Because he's a silent protagonist, we don't really know what he's thinking or feeling. I would love to know what Link is thinking or feeling in this exact moment. I want to know, is he shy? Is he scared? Is he terrified? I always assumed he was scared and he wanted to run away because he was grossed out when I was a kid. Because when I was a kid, I thought he was like one of those people who's like, ew, cooties. I gave all of you the shortened version of the first 3 to 5 hours of the game. I feel like Kokiri Forest and the Great Deku Tree are great tutorial introductions to the game that I needed to emphasize the most. Its mechanics and introduction to the story in the game. However, even though you're set out on this journey to find the princess and the spiritual stones, sometimes during the early parts of the game it feels like you're still on the tutorial. But I don't mean that in a bad way. As the player, it makes you feel like the game has so much more in store, and similar to a child, it makes you feel like you want to do everything, but at the same time, you're just not able to because you're not old enough. Like Lon Lon Ranch, where Link can learn Epona's song, something that has no proper use when you learn it. There's also that mysterious broken stairway near Saria that leads to an unknown part of the forest. Kakariko Village having shops that just never open. Death Mountain Crater being a place that Link can partially explore, but it's just too hot for him to handle. Seeing the diving pool and the water temple in Lake Hylia, but not being able to dive deep enough to reach the bottom of either. Even Gerudo Valley, a place where Link is never directed to at all, aside from knowing Ganondorf is from there, just lets you approach the gate, but denies you entry. Just a little taste of more unknown things up ahead. It gets to a point where there's just nothing left for you, aside from just some side collectibles, planting some magic beans, or trying to save a family that turned into spiders because they got cursed for their greed. But even then, you eventually reach the limit of what this young hero can do. His size, his age, his limited arsenal, they all get in the way of exploring further. I don't know if it was intentional to feel this way or not, but it makes me feel like, in a sense, you have to grow up in order to advance further. This feeling becomes stronger when Link tries to return to Zelda after retrieving all the spiritual stones, but instead of being greeted by a familiar sight, his nightmare from the start of the game comes true. Zelda throws the Ocarina of Time towards Link, just so Link can have the final key to open the door of time, and she believes that he is the last line of defense to protect the Triforce from Ganondorf by using what's on the other side of the door, the Master Sword, the Blade of Evil's Bane. But by pulling the Master Sword, Link unknowingly opens the portal to the Sacred Realm, with Ganondorf being revealed to have followed him into it. If you didn't put the pieces together earlier, Ganondorf was the one who plagued Gorons and Jabu Jabu with all the monster problems that they had, and that also includes the Great Deku Tree. They were all cursed with these things when they refused to give him the spiritual stones. But after seeing Link earlier, he had this gut feeling that Link had the spiritual stones in his possession, thus saving him the trouble of trying to collect them later. And now, he was with the full Triforce in his possession. But Link never witnessed any of this himself. Being put into the Sacred Realm forced him and Navi into a deep slumber as the screen fades to white. Within the white empty void, our hero is awakened by a voice calling him the Chosen One. And upon opening his eyes, we're within an empty space filled with these platforms with waterfalls pouring above them, with only a few pedestals not having been submerged fully. This is the Chamber of Sages. In front of him is Rauru, one of the ancient sages who built the Temple of Time. He's also known as the Sage of Light, and he took the form of an owl by the name of Kaepora Gaebora in order to guide Link as a kid. Yes, that same strange owl that's been following us around this journey. Also, he put Link to sleep for 7 years since he was too young to hold the Master Sword until now. And Ganondorf is at the height of his power. His evil influence can be felt across all the temples in Hyrule. The only way to defeat him now is through awakening the power of the sages and working together with them. After giving Link his Medallion of Light, he sends him back to the Temple of Time, where Sheik, another member of the Sheikah, is waiting for him. He gives Link a couple clues on the locations of the slumbering sages. I'm not entirely sure what's the right word to describe Sheik's theme, but it makes the hints and everything he says come off as like it's coming from a poetic-sounding tone. It also evokes feelings of curiosity and mystery as to who Sheik really is. When evil rules all, an awakening voice from the Sacred Realm will call those destined to be sages who dwell in the 5 temples. One in a deep forest within a long abandoned fortress filled with the souls of those who were lost deep in the woods and guarded by an evil phantom. One on a high mountain, its temple now becoming a prison for Gorons waiting to be fed to the resurrected ancient dragon Volvagia. One under a vast lake, an underwater labyrinth with its guardian being a gluttonous amoeba. One within the House of the Dead, a long-kept secret of the royal family, their torture chambers from the Civil War found not too far from the peaceful Kakariko village, haunted by restless spirits from Hyrule's bloodied past. And finally, one inside a goddess of sand, a temple where the hero must work with himself across both eras in order to unlock the full mystery of this ancient Gerudo worship site, a site that now the witch sisters and surrogate mothers of Ganondorf, Kume and Kotake, use as their lair. Together with the hero of time, the awakened ones will bind the evil and return the light of peace to the world. This is the legend of the temples passed down by my people, the Sheikah. Again, I don't know what the right word to describe Sheik's theme is, or Sheik's way of speaking, but the hints that he gives just evoke these feelings of being so poetic and artsy and curious about the mystery revolving around Sheik. He even knows the first sage we're going to look for, which is going to be the one of the Forest Temple, Link's childhood friend Saria. And one thing I always liked about Link is that he's a silent protagonist, meant for us as the player to insert our feelings into whenever we see him faced with a difficult situation, or just any situation at all. Of course, Link has a personality and little quirks we see throughout many instances of the franchise, but I'm talking more about moments like these. At this point, Link's journey has been hit with back-to-back gut punches. His father figure died because he was too slow. The children in his home village blame him for it. The quest he's been on since the beginning seems to have failed before he even reached the princess. He was put to sleep and basically lost 7 years of his life, forced to grow up. And now he's being told that his childhood friend is in danger because Ganondorf's powers are getting in the way of her becoming a sage. And there's one point in the game where you had to learn her song in order to cheer up Darunia, but that song also allowed you to communicate with her throughout the game. So depending on what kind of player you are, Link might have been having conversations with Saria across his whole journey, which adds another gut punch to this list. And on top of all of that, the world outside the forest that you've only recently come to know and understand suddenly changes. If I were Link, I'd be at rock bottom, but regardless of this, Link continues further either way. And again, that's just how the current me feels, because as a kid, I thought this was the coolest part of the game. Because from here, everything else just feels like it's elevated a lot higher. It becomes more fun, and it finally stops feeling like a tutorial. And the world changing around him probably being a shock or a sad sight for Link, but to us, the player, it feels like the world is actually alive. From the Temple of Time alone, we can see how different the world has gotten. There's even a big fiery ring floating around Death Mountain. And Castle Town is completely destroyed after being filled with the undead. The only person remaining is a creepy Poe collector, a man running a shop which was once originally a guardhouse in the child era. Link can sell any of the Poes that he collects in bottles. The path that would originally lead you to the castle is completely destroyed, and Ganondorf's castle now hovers above a massive pit of lava where the previous one once stood. Lon Lon Ranch gets taken over by Ingo, someone who was previously just an employee, and now Malon is forced to work alone on the ranch since her father was kicked out. This is actually where Epona's song finally comes in handy. It's the only way to get Epona to come to you, and it'll lead to Ingo racing you for the horse. She serves as a means of traveling across Hyrule faster, but she's also needed to get to Gerudo Valley since the bridge was destroyed. Visiting Lake Hylia, it's almost completely dried up now, and the shortcut to Zora's domain is blocked by a blue wall. If you make your way to Zora's domain, the blue wall is revealed to be a massive wall of ice after the whole place got frozen over, along with the Zoras living there. Making your way to Zora's fountain, Jabu Jabu is nowhere to be seen, presumably dead, and in his place is a bunch of ice platforms. You can jump over them to enter the ice cavern where Link can find the iron boots. You'll need them to sink down in order to access the water temple later. There's even blue fire here with the ability to melt red ice like the one that we see King Zora trapped inside of. And after we save him, he gives us the Zora tunic, basically a blue shirt that lets Link breathe underwater. Kakariko Village is still the same peaceful village as it was 7 years ago, but now it feels really clustered and a bit chaotic because of all the Castletown survivors that fled to here. If you go to the graveyard, you notice not much has changed, although the souls are more restless now since you don't even have to disturb their graves for them to come out. The graveyard keeper, Dampe, has passed away. He actually has his own grave that you can enter and challenge him to a ghost race. And if you manage to catch up to him before all the doors close, he'll give Link the hookshot, another returning item, and it's necessary for progression. Visiting the mountains, the trail up is filled with boulders, and there's even larger boulders rolling down the pathway, and the volcano itself has become much more violent with its eruptions. If you make your way to Goron City, what was once filled with Gorons either chilling or racing around is now only left with one resident. Link, the Goron. He's the son of Darunia, and he's the one who tells you that all the Gorons were taken into the Fire Temple in order to be sacrificed to the dragon inside, and he also gives Link the Goron tunic so he'll be able to withstand the hotter temperatures. Why did I say withstand like that? And finally, making your way to the main objective, Kokiri Forest, the once peaceful little village, is now littered with monsters because of the lack of a forest guardian and the evil power coming from inside of the Forest Temple. All of the Kokiri children are taking shelter inside of their homes. None of them recognize Link since the Kokiri don't age. They just think he's a little bit weird since he's dressed like one of them and also has a fairy. Even Mido, who's now guarding the way to the Forest Temple at Saria's request. But once Link plays Saria's song, he trusts him enough to rescue her. This is when the game started to feel a little bit bitter for me as a kid. Whether it be entering the Forest Meadow, entering Death Mountain Crater after obtaining the hookshot, or entering the icy room where the iron boots are hidden, Sheik reappears to teach Link a song so Link can fast travel to the dungeons, along with giving him a poetic speech that relates to Link and his relationship with the sages. There's a YouTuber by the name of Goodblood who made a video about the 3 different perspectives you can view the story of Ocarina of Time, which I highly recommend you check out. But to make it short, the surface level of it is that it's a grand adventure that I would view it as when I was a child. The natural balance needing to be restored is from a Shintoistic perspective, which this video made me aware of, and finally is the one that I've come to understand as I've grown older, and it's the perspective of being forced to grow up. I mentioned this video because I like the way it describes Link's relationship with the sages he met throughout his journey, and I view this game with the perspective of seeing a character who is forced to lose his innocence and the people closest to him for the sake of everyone else, and I find that it somewhat relates to what Sheik says at the entrance to every single one of these temples. The flow of time is always cruel. Its speed seems different for each person, but no one can change it. A thing that doesn't change with time is a memory of younger days. In order to come back here again, play the Minute of the Forest. When trying to look for Saria, Link's childhood friend and symbol of his innocence and his home from before he was forced onto this journey, is missing from her usual spot. It is something that grows over time, a true friendship, a feeling in the heart that becomes even stronger over time. The passion of friendship will soon blossom into a righteous power, and through it, you will know which way to go. This song is dedicated to the power of the heart. Listen to the Bolero of Fire. Darunia, being Link's sworn brother, is a representation of family, but Link only gets a brief moment to chat with him before he meets his demise. Time passes, people move. Like a river's flow, it never ends. A childish mind will turn to a noble ambition. Young love will become deep affection. The clear water's surface reflects growth. Now listen to the serenade of water to reflect upon yourself. Princess Ruto being the first girl to outwardly express her liking towards Link, and getting engaged to him, and even calling him her fiancé before she meets her demise, she is the one who represents the form of romantic love in his life. Friendship, family, and love, all being stripped away from him. Not just in death, but even after Link beats and rescues and awakens all of them after defeating whatever evil is holding them in the temple, none of them are meant to be together. Their roles force them to live realms apart from each other. And sure, you could argue Link could just go back in time and see them again, but the difference between the past versions and future versions of all of Link's friends is that they don't live through the same experiences. It's kind of tragic, because the future ones, they're just gone. And the past ones, I don't know how Link is seeing them, but Link probably looks at the past ones and just thinks like, damn, I know what's going to happen to you, but you would never believe me. That's the way I see it. That's the way I've always seen it. And it's just, can you imagine going back in time and just seeing someone that you care about, that you can no longer talk to in the future, and you just can't do anything about that? Sorry, I didn't mean to stray off. I just had like a little bit of a moment there. Alright, I know I've been talking a lot about the game itself at this point, but I think now's a good time I talk about the old guidebooks. If you watched any of my Mario videos or the Link to the Past episode, I briefly mentioned in each of those videos how much of an impact the art, descriptions, characters, locations, and lore of the guidebooks really hit me. But at the time, I actually couldn't find the guidebooks until after I made my Link to the Past video. Luckily, they were all together, but I didn't realize until I found them that my dad actually owned 2 Ocarina of Time guidebooks. One is official and the other one is by Prima. And again, they had the same effect on me as all the other guidebooks, assisting my imagination and filling in some gaps of the game's story and physical limitations that the game just couldn't do. Basically, headcanons before I really knew what headcanons were. But I think what I liked about these two the most was their differences, like how the official guide is more visually detailed in its maps, as well as there being official art of characters and locations on almost every page, while at the same time not giving everything about the game away. Meanwhile, the Prima one's maps are more like outlines and littered to the brim with screenshots to show you exactly where you need to go to do everything. Honestly, I just think the differences are good, and they can help people depending on the type of playstyle you have, like the official one giving you hints and directions in a way that leaves room for surprise and exploration. The Primo one, however, is for people who want to be thorough and discover everything in every nook and cranny. Child me loved the official book more because you could see full zoomed in pictures of some areas like Goron City or the desert wasteland. Aside from the maps, my favorite pages were the ones that had renders of the side quest items and just the items in general just being all high quality. Yeah, the high quality renders, that's the word I'm looking for. The mask trading quest in this game is probably one of my favorite moments in all of Zelda, since as a reward you get a Goron, Zora, and Gerudo mask. I remember that was the only quest my dad did not do in his Ocarina of Time save file, so when I turned 13, I completed it for him, thus 100%ing his game save file. I also remember in my preteen years, when I first discovered Majora's Mask, I was hoping there'd be a Gerudo mask there because I wanted to play as a Gerudo. Like, so badly. I wanted to be like a little dual-wielding swordsman that can do like backflips and stuff like that. You know, I actually thought for a while when I was a kid that the Gerudo mask could transform Link into a Gerudo. Anyways, to end off this section, my favorite pages are the full render versions of the trade quest items, all of them. The guided hints to every golden Skulltula, they're not really specific, they're actually just hints. A little hard to follow, but it does encourage a lot of exploration until you find them, and they even tell you if you can find them in the daytime or the nighttime. I also love the map of the bean sprout locations, because you can actually also get golden Skulltulas from these bean sprouts as well. But I think my absolute favorite page in the entire book are the ones that are showing the beautiful renders of Link's full arsenal. Of course, we have the returning items like the bow, the bomb, the boomerang. The fairy slingshot is Link's projectile weapon as a child, since he's too small to use a bow and arrow. The Deku sticks can be swung like swords, but they're mainly used to light fires. Deku nuts can stun enemies. The lens of truth allows Link to see enemies in platforms that are either invisible or are just lies. Bombachus are these cute little rat-shaped explosives that can scurry up walls. The hookshot and hammer get new variations in this game, known as the long shot and the megaton hammer. Obviously, the long shot can carry Link across longer distances, but the megaton hammer is just used to break giant rocks, and also press down on rusty switches, and even get some reactions out of some enemies. The bow and light arrows return alongside fire arrows and ice arrows for the first time in the series. A few great fairies gift Link the ability to warp to specific rooms, or create a magic shield that protects you, or even the ability to set every enemy surrounding you on fire. These are known as Farore's Wind, Nehru's Love, and Din's Fire. Of course, I can't forget Link's new equipment. The iron boots allow Link to sink underwater. Meanwhile, the hover boots allow Link to hover off platforms for a few seconds, but if he's walking around normal ground, it'll make him pretty slippery. And of course, I can't forget the coolest weapon in the entire game, the reward for the trading quest, the Goron sword. It's the first ever two-handed weapon Link has wielded in the Zelda franchise. If you'd like to hear more about these guidebooks, there are archived versions of them on Internet Archive. But if you'd like to see me go through them, I've got a video up for... Originally, I wanted to put it up for channel members, but then I thought, that's kind of a dick move. I want everyone to watch it. So, it'll be public, like, now. Or it's been public. It should be my last upload before this. Okay, but to wrap up this section for real and go back to the game, I just gotta say, it feels a bit weird saying all this stuff out loud, because these guidebooks are just as important to me as the game itself. I don't think I've ever heard anyone feel this way towards a guidebook, so maybe I'm just weird. Or maybe that's just something special about my experience with this game. While the first act of Ocarina of Time had Link acknowledging friendship, gaining family, and experiencing a form of romantic love, the second act has Link losing the key people that represented those things in his life, and the third act shifts away from all those things completely. Going to Kakariko Village, Link is faced with having to destroy an evil spirit housed within the Shadow Temple. It's situated at the graveyard, right behind the royal family's tomb. But in order to access every inch of the temple, Link needs to find the Lens of Truth at the bottom of the well in Kakariko Village. If you're someone who's played other Zelda games that feature Kakariko Village, you're probably imagining it's just a little well with a cute cave inside. It's a torture chamber. The well was built on top of the house of a Sheikah man with the ability to see the truth. The Lens of Truth is probably made out of his eyes. And seeing as to how similar the bottom of the well is to the Shadow Temple, as well as Dead Hand being able to appear in both the well and the temple, based on that and some other evidence found in the game, it's assumed that the Sheikah man ended up being tortured and killed during the Hyrulean Civil War that took place right before the events of the game, and he became the evil spirit attacking the town, now known as Bongo Bongo. His hands are cut off, yet he can control them, and where his head once was is now just the root of his neck and a massive red eyeball. The Shadow Temple represents growing up and realizing that the world isn't all sunshine and rainbows. Sure, bad stuff was happening in Hyrule, but it still was just a whimsical fantasy until you're hit with this harsh reality that this world isn't as kind as you thought it was. But in turn, I feel like this part of the game also evokes feelings of responsibility. Despite knowing all these ugly truths, you're still responsible for needing to do good and push further. The only problem with this section is that it's easy to build up walls towards everyone when you realize this in life, and that's why I think it's fitting that the Shadow Temple and Spirit Temple are separated into their own parts in the game because they both complement each other. When you get to Gerudo Valley for the first time, a group of carpenters were trapped on the Gerudo side of the bridge, but instead of repairing it, all the employees thought being carpenters were boring, so they decided to join the Gerudo. However, they didn't get the memo that everyone is a woman and they only have a man born every 100 years, and any outsiders are getting locked up forever for reasons. This was an era of Hyrule before they had any friendly relationships with Hylians, like in the future titles. Instead, they're infamous for being thieves who blindly follow their king Ganondorf. And sure, when Link tries to free the carpenters, he'll either be caught and thrown in jail, or he'll have to fight one of the warriors. However, after saving the final carpenter, I remember my whole perception of the Gerudo being the enemy, just like Ganondorf, entirely crumbled. Like, yeah, they serve him and all, but because Link was good enough to fight off some of their strongest warriors, he is made an honorary member of the Gerudo tribe, and now they're all just chill with him. Later on, when we make our way to the Spirit Temple and learn it symbolizes harmony between the young self and old self coming together to beat this dungeon, which I honestly think is really cool, and I wish more of the dungeons in this game had sections like this where you have to utilize both links. But we meet Nabooru, second in command of the Gerudo tribe, and genuine Ganondorf hater. And if we're being completely honest here, although the Gerudo are loyal to Ganondorf because of their laws, they all love Nabooru a lot more for just being more reasonable and likable. So much so that Ganondorf's adoptive mothers saw her as a liability, so they kidnapped and brainwashed her, and as a way to trick the Gerudo that didn't like Ganondorf into listening to her, or listening to them through her. And later on, they even turn her into an iron knuckle. But don't worry about Nabooru. We defeat the witches, and then they fuse into an even taller one, and we defeat her. But honestly, this is probably one of my favorite boss fights in the whole game. I always loved elemental bosses in every video game I played, and I love the fact that like Link can absorb like their elemental attack through the mirror shield and then shoot it back at them once it's charged enough. And I especially liked how they promised to take revenge on Link and actually kept true to that threat when they returned in the Oracle games. But again, while the first act of Ocarina of Time had Link acknowledging friendship, gaining family, and experiencing a form of romantic love from the perspective of a child, the second act has Link losing the key people that represented that in his life, and became that in his life from the perspective of the same child, now a grown-up. And this third act shifts away from focusing on these kinds of connections and instead focuses on the responsibility and trust adults need to have. I mean, look at the sages you meet in this act, both originating from two sides of the main conflict. We have on one side Impa of the Sheikah tribe, responsible for taking care of Princess Zelda, and her tribe as a whole is responsible for taking care of the royal family and directly working under them. On the other hand, Nabooru, second in command of the Gerudo, doesn't like what her leader is doing and actively, I don't know if she's actively disobeying or not, I don't know if the game actually implies that, but from what I do know, she just outright doesn't trust him and doesn't like any of what he's doing. Maybe I'm reaching a little bit when I talk about this act revolving around responsibility and trust. Maybe it's responsibility and loyalty. I'm not entirely just, I don't know. It's hard to really put into words. I'm someone who feels more than I think when it comes to stuff like this. And all of this just culminates into the final arc of this act. Link returns to the Temple of Light and learns the reason why he's so important to the fate of Hyrule. It wasn't just because he was chosen by the Master Sword, but also because during the 7-year gap while Link was asleep, Ganondorf got his hands on the full Triforce, and after making his wish, it split into 3 pieces. And his true goal while Link was asleep was to look for the other 2 pieces and reclaim them. Because Ganondorf trusts in the use of power to have his foes submit to his will, his beliefs cause the Triforce of Power to stay with him. Meanwhile, the Triforce of Courage chooses someone who exemplifies bravery and courage. And the Triforce of Wisdom goes to the wise 7th Sage, the Sage of Time that leads the others. Then Sheik does this really sick-looking pose and the Triforce emanates from the back of his hand, and as a kid, I remember my jaw dropping at this revelation. Seeing a character you spent a few moments in the game with being more important to the story than just a guide character, and ending up being a much bigger key part to the story overall was probably one of the first ever times I experienced a plot twist of this caliber. But not only that, but after the Triforce emanates in a blinding light, you realize you're hit with a double plot twist where Sheik is revealed to be Zelda in disguise this whole time. She's been disguised as a Sheikah all this time to hide from Ganondorf and his minions, revealing herself now because Link is at the height of his power. And now he has all the key pieces to raid Ganondorf's castle, as well as gifting Link the light arrows for even more damage to be done. However, this reunion is cut short as Ganondorf encases Zelda inside of a pink rupee and transports her into his chambers at the top of the tower, and Link gains access to the tower with the help of the sages making a rainbow bridge. I said in my previous Zelda video how the final dungeons are usually tests of all the things the player has learned throughout the game, challenging you on every aspect of the game, but something about Ocarina of Time's way of doing it just makes it feel like a proper send-off, because rather than just being a test of everything, it's a test of everything while also keeping the theming of the different things that you went throughout the game, or the different places you went. You'll see. It's broken up into 6 different sections, each representing one of the sages. At the end of each of these sections is a barrier that represents one of their elements, and it's guarding Ganondorf's tower. It's actually really ironic that a villain that believes in absolute power has a massive tower that is guarded by a force field that is also being guarded by a massive outer wall that is also in turn guarded by a massive pit of lava that it floats above. It just makes Ganondorf look like a coward, and I find that really funny. I didn't notice that as a kid. It's something I notice now every time I replay. The spirit section plays into the times you have to move things like Armos to help you avoid spike traps, and use the hook shot in order to collect silver rupees or just things in hard to reach places. There's also the use of bomb chews to unlock doors, and even using a fire-based weapon to burn down cobwebs. We haven't even seen cobwebs since the first temple in the game, which again, like I said, this place calls back to practically everything that you've experienced in the game. Even more recent things like the use of the mirror shield in order to reflect light on these sun switches. Can you really call them switches? The shadow section reminds you to use the lens of truth in order to see hidden platforms, as well as giving you the golden gauntlet upgrades. They allow Link to progress further, but they also give Link the ability to move a giant boulder blocking the pathway to the final Great Fairy, one that grants Link a defense boost, and it's trapped right outside of the castle. The water section is pretty much just a mini ice cavern, blue fire and red ice included. The forest section relies heavily on the use of fans and the hover boots, which, if you didn't know, because I know I didn't mention earlier, but the forest sage and the water sage were originally supposed to be wind and ice. You can tell by just looking at their medallions. In an attempt to enter the light section, Link throws the giant rock at the barrier. That's not really relevant to what I'm talking about, but I like to assume that he's just trying to loosen the barrier a little bit too. The light section is much easier and shorter than any of the other sections, but it also brings back invisible chests, using songs to progress, and even having fake walls that you could walk through. And finally, the fire section is another silver rupee mission, but one that incorporates parts of the fire temple. After dispelling every elemental barrier, Link gains access to the central tower, and after fighting off hordes of enemies and reaching the top, finally confronts Ganondorf, who after the 7-year gap has grown much taller and has longer hair, and his eyes are like this piercing yellow now. And then he proceeds to say probably one of my favorite Ganondorf lines in the whole franchise. "These toys are far too much for you. Return them to me." And then proceeds to hit Link and Navi with a wave of darkness, which reminds me and everyone who played this game that the only reason we're allowed to even Z-target in this game is because it's Navi. We're not locking onto the enemy, we're locking onto Navi, and with her now not being able to get close enough to Ganondorf because of his evil energy, this is the only boss fight in the whole game where you cannot target an enemy, except for when you knock him down or stun him. So instead you just have to perfectly time each of your sword swings in a game of Dead Man's Volley, and once you've paralyzed Ganondorf with his own attack, you can stop him from flying and hovering around, and you use your light arrows to just knock him off and swing at him as much as you can, which eventually leads to him exerting all of his energy in one final attempt to take out Link and Zelda with him. But of course he fails, and by exerting all his energy, I mean making the entire tower crumble. But even after escaping the castle and it crumbling all on top of him, this man is intoxicated with malice, still stands and uses the Triforce of Power to become Ganon. I remember it used to give me chills seeing the name just stand alone, just the title, no subtext before it at all. One thing about this game is that it's the origin story of Ganon, along with a lot of the other things that happen in this franchise, but this right here is such an incredible moment to see in context of someone who played A Link to the Past before this game. This is the big reveal that you are seeing the events unfold that lead into the imprisoning war mentioned in that game. And on top of all of that, he just goes and swats away Link's sword before the battle even starts. So if you didn't get the Goron sword earlier in the game, you have to use the Megaton hammer and the light arrows or whatever weapons you have at your disposal that can damage him at all. But once you finally manage to knock him down, Link retrieves the Master Sword and with the help of Princess Zelda and the sages, finish off Ganon for good. With a couple slashes to the face and one big stab, the sages seal him away in a place that the Japanese version calls Beyond the Land of the Dead. And with that, we see Ganondorf one final time, vowing to kill all the future descendants of Link, Zelda, and the sages. Meanwhile, Link and Zelda, although only just reunited, have to say their goodbyes. She feels bad about everything that Link went through, all because of her. Regretting the choices that she made when she was younger, her plan to stop Ganondorf led to him losing his childhood and forcing him to grow up. And with the use of the Ocarina of Time, she sends Link back in time, to before they ever met, so that Link, now having lived through all these events, can warn Princess Zelda and the royal family of everything that's to come. And this time around, he'll be taken seriously now that he has a sign of the Triforce of Courage on the back of his hand. Link arrives back to his home timeline facing the Master Sword on the day he met Zelda, and Navi, fulfilling her quest given to her by the Great Deku Tree of guiding Link to bring justice and order to Hyrule, leaves Link. Many theorize why Navi left, or that Navi's dead, but that doesn't matter. What does matter is that she's fulfilled her role, and this moment isn't just one of Link losing his closest friend, but also the last thread of his childhood is finally gone. And the game closes with its final scene of Link and Zelda meeting for the first time, but this time around, things take a different turn. This final act is quite possibly one of my favorite moments in the franchise because this eventually leads into a whole legacy of heroes and people impacted by the events that took place in this game across 3 different timelines. Some people may hate the use of time travel and the whole notion of the use of a multiverse in fiction, but it's because of this game and the games that followed after that I love media that uses these tropes. In Wind Waker, the next 3D Zelda, it takes place in the future timeline where Link defeats Ganon, but Ganon escaped his imprisonment by the gods, and then they decided that after all he did during the events of Ocarina of Time, the best solution was to just submerge Hyrule under a massive ocean. And this time around, Ganondorf is more calmer, knowing what it's like to be at the height of his power, but overall being sad because his action caused the Gerudo to all die out. And the Link of this era is probably one of the coolest ones in my opinion, just for the fact that he's not even related to the Ocarina of Time Link by blood. So instead, he earns the spirit of the hero. He has to work in order to inherit that. Twilight Princess takes place in the timeline where Link went back in time and warned the royal family, causing Ganondorf to be sealed away in a place called the Twilight Realm instead. But of course, he escapes. But in this era, because Ganondorf never became the king of evil, he's even more malicious, using more brutal tactics, and as the player, you kind of realize he'd been planning to free Zora's domain for a long time, like, damn. It's crazy. Like, he'd probably been thinking that stuff up even years before the events of Ocarina of Time. And the Link of this era learns to fight from the ghosts of Ocarina of Time Link, regretting that nobody remembered anything he did because the events were all erased in this timeline, and also regretting not having passed down his fighting techniques to anyone. And finally, there's A Link to the Past. Of course, Ocarina of Time was made as a prequel to A Link to the Past, but this timeline exists because of another iteration of the final battle, where Link lost to Ganondorf and is eternally stuck in his boar form. In every game of this entire timeline, Ganon is killed and resurrected over and over again. But A Link to the Past is the first game where we see him break out of this timeline's version of the Sage's Seal. And of course, I do have to acknowledge there isn't a wrong way to play any of these games. For Nintendo, yes, the game's story is important, but the majority of the time, Nintendo makes their games, like Zelda, accessible to everyone regardless of how many games you play, or whichever one was your first game. Even with later entries like Tears of the Kingdom, where the developers made it in a way where you don't have to play Breath of the Wild in order to enjoy the story of this one. And on top of that, even if some games are canonically like sequels or prequels to each other, dating a couple hundred years apart, you're supposed to view these games like they're stories being told to you, not like these are like the actual ways that they're supposed to look. That's why Hyrule looks just different in Twilight Princess versus Ocarina of Time, and they're about like 150 to 200 years apart. Or the Hyrule in Echoes of Wisdom technically being the same one from A Link to the Past and A Link Between Worlds, just now having a swamp and ocean and just like an entire expansion to it that didn't exist prior to that. And yeah, that was Ocarina of Time. Of course, I can't forget to acknowledge the 3DS remake, which near accurately captures the look of Ocarina of Time's 2D art style into 3D, and it even includes Master Quest, which is an alternate version of Ocarina of Time, which serves as like a hard mode version of it. The 3DS remake also has a boss rush, new detailed textures, new gossip stones that give you visual hints. The iron boots are treated like an item instead of equipment you have to constantly go to the menu to switch out. There are also multiple Skyward Sword Easter eggs everywhere because it's around the same time like Skyward Sword was like new. And also it has gyroscope aiming, which is basically like motion control aiming, and it's actually really comfortable. It's really fun. But that is a version of Ocarina of Time I haven't played fully, so I don't really feel right talking about it here in this video. It is superior in almost every way, and I'll give it that, but it can never replace or emulate those feelings I had when I played the original version of the game. And I remember being with my dad and playing the game, sitting on the floor in front of our old gray CRT television in the living room, and just making my mom mad at the mess of game guides we had littered across the floor. It's truly one of my most cherished memories, and one of my many reasons why this game is one of my favorites, and made me into the gamer and lore nerd I am now. I will always enjoy this game. I will always do at least 1 or 2 playthroughs of this game every year. I've been doing that since I was like 13 or 14. And with that, this chapter of my life and my channel has officially come to a close. I've finally talked about every single game I grew up with from my dad's consoles. Aside from the dive into the Resident Evil franchise I'm currently on, the next era of this channel will be mainly focusing on going over the next era of my life, the Nintendo DS, my first video game console.